Hello everyone, Bible believers around the world, and we're finally back with part 2 of the Unmasking the Edomites series with the new branch covering Amalek. Now there's a lot of falsehood and misinformation that is spread about the Amalekites, and not just from the One West camps, but also from the Ashkenazi Jews themselves, because I remember reading an article a few months ago, I think it was, where apparently the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, called the Palestinians Amalek. And of course, we know the One West camps called the Ashkenazi Jews Amalek. So Amalek has really just become a filler word that different peoples use as a postage stamp to put on different peoples who they hate or different people who oppose them or whatever. But in this series, we're going to be breaking down the scriptures. We're going to be looking at some ancient depictions, and we're going to be figuring out who is the real Amalek today. And also, we're going to be seeing if the Ashkenazi Jew is actually the Amalekite of the scriptures, and is that One West doctrine sound doctrine, or is it another foolish doctrine that needs to bite the dust? Let's get started with this new series. Okay, right off the bat, we're gonna dive right on into this. So the first thing that I'm going to cover in this lesson is something that sons and daughters of the covenant of Yah actually brought out first, and that is, the truth is, using the scriptures alone, without any other sources, we actually don't have any proof that the Amalekites are actually associated with the Edomites in any way. So it's actually up for debate if the Edomite man who is named Amalek is actually the progenitor of the Amalekites. Let me explain. So in the Bible, we have two Enochs. We have a good Enoch and we have a bad Enoch. But the fact of the matter is, there were two separate dudes who lived very different lifestyles whose name was both Enoch. All right? Now, what are the chances that the Amalekites and the Edomite dude named Amalek is a situation just like the two Enochs? Because all of the scholars who link the Amalekites to being descendants of Esau do that because they come to the conclusion that the man who was named Amalek must be the progenitor of the Amalekite peoples. But we're going to look at this map and some scriptures that actually may put the idea up in the air that the Amalekites are actually something completely separate from the Edomites entirely. For starters, let's look at this map of the so-called Middle East. When we look at the territory of the Amalekites are in the area of the Philistines, the Jebusites, and the Amorites. Meanwhile, on the right, we have the land of the Hebrew Edomites, the Hebrew Moabites, and the Hebrew Ammonites. Now, Esau, and for his descendants, he was given Mount Seir and the land of Edom. Esau did not receive multiple regions of inheritance for his peoples. So right off the bat, the Amalekites are over there with the Canaanite folks and not in the land of Edom with the Edomites. So it's already kind of sus that we have the Amalekites who are not living in the land that was given to the ancestor Esau like the rest of the Edomites. So they are living separate from the Edomites. That's something very interesting as well. But it's going to get even crazier. Let's keep going. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 7, this is the huge hole. This is the smoking gun right here. So the Amalekites actually appeared in scripture before Esau was even born, because Esau was born in Genesis chapter 25, but we have the Amalekites being alive in Abraham's time period. So how can Esau be the progenitor of the Amalekites if the Amalekites already existed before he was even born? And keep in mind, Esau had a son who was named Amalek. Amalek was the son of one of the sons of Esau, because Eliphaz was Edomite, and then Eliphaz had a child, and Eliphaz's child was name was Amalek. So not even just, straight up Esau, like one of Esau's grandsons. So a few generations even further back than just Esau himself. So some people have tried to come up with the idea that this is a prequel, and that Genesis chapter 14, verse 7 is saying that this is the land that would be the land of the Amalekites in the future. But that doesn't really make any sense, because we never see that in the scripture any other time. For instance, the land of Canaan would eventually become inherited by the Israelites, but it was still called the land of Canaan before the Israelites took it over. We didn't have Jerusalem being name dropped before Jerusalem was even built. So why would the Amalekites have a prequel but the Israelites did not have a prequel. Why would the land of Canaan be called the land of Canaan before, why would the land of Canaan be called, Israel and Jerusalem and all that type of stuff before Israel actually was a thing? But the Amalekites get to have their name dropped before they're even a thing. So between the map and between the Amalekites being name dropped before Esau was even born is some food for thought. Another thing that's food for thought is look who they're listed with, the Amorites. If we go back to the map, look who's down there, the Amorites. Let's keep going. Now we're in Psalms 83. Yeah, the good old Psalms 83. Now we're in something even more interesting here. In Psalms 83, Amalek is not listed alongside the Edomites because, it talks about Edom, Moab. This is just me talking now. This is just me talking now about Psalms 83. Some people may think I'm reaching, but wouldn't it make sense that if the Amalekites were Edomites, that they would be listed in the same grouping as the Edomites in Psalms 83 and not listed with the Philistines? When we go back to the map, look who's with the Amalekites, the Philistines. That's who they live near. So between the Amalekites being mentioned before Esau was even born, between them being mentioned with the Amorites, who on the map, they're nearby the Amorites, and then them being mentioned in Psalm 83 alongside the Philistines, and they live near the Philistines, it's something very interesting to think about. We actually don't have any biblical proof that the Amalekites were actually founded by the son of Eliphaz. Now, if I'm wrong about that, feel free to comment a verse down below, but I haven't seen it. Let's move on. Now I'd like to intervene here and mention something that doesn't make sense according to the scripture when it comes to this One West doctrine that the Ashkenazi Jews are Amalek. Now, we've talked about in the past how the Esau's the white man doctrine actually finds its origins from the Jewish Talmudic peoples. It never actually originated with Edward Bivens in One West. Edward Bivens, who was the founder of One West, took that doctrine and made it famous, but he's not the guy who really started it. It was the Jewish Talmudists making the claim that Rome is Edom. All right? So the Synagogue of Satan is the guys who came up with that. All right? But here's what I really want to highlight and how this doctrine really falls apart when you start to realize this. So if you're saying that white people are Esau, and then you're saying that the Ashkenazi Jews are Esau, and then we know that the doctrine of Esau being the white man comes from the Ashkenazi Jews, and then we look in prophecy and learn that the Edomites are trying to hide themselves, and they don't want to be known, they don't want to be found or whatever. Why is Esau exposing Esau? Why is Esau exposing Esau? There's nowhere in scripture where it says that the Edomites would expose themselves. There's nowhere in prophecy that says that. So, by the Ashkenazi Jews teaching that false doctrine, if that doctrine is true, that means Esau just sold himself out. And then this the other way around. You got guys, I've read old newspapers from like 1909 of guys claiming that the Ashkenazi Jews are Amalek or that they're Edomites or whatever. So if Henry Ford was an Edomite and he calls, Netanyahu an Edomite, then it's Esau attacking Esau. So now it really makes no sense. You see, you got to really put things into perspective here and see the structure fall to the ground of this doctrine. You see the building just completely get knocked down. And then people mention, the Jewish encyclopedia says that, Edom is in modern Jewry. And we'll cover that. But once again, why is Esau exposing himself when the scripture says he don't want to be found? That makes absolutely no sense. But yeah, we'll definitely cover, the Jewish encyclopedia, because there's some history that people need to know about that type of stuff. So we'll get there. Okay, this is one thing I'd like to cover. I'll cover this more in future episodes in this Bible study series. We'll also cover the Khazars in the new Finding Japheth series, because I plan to do a new version of that series, because I'm not happy how out of order and just bouncing around I was with the first version of that. So stay tuned for that Bible study series to come later this year. So, many Israelites are aware of the book, The 13th Tribe, where it exposes the Ashkenazi Jew Khazar connection. But one thing about One West is they will take sources that have nothing to do with Esau, and then they'll just slap Esau's name on it. For one thing, a lot of the doctrine about, white people in the Caucasus Mountains and them being like animals and all this type of stuff, that comes from Elijah Muhammad. That comes from the Nation Islam. That was his doctrine. That was his writings. And one thing that Elijah Muhammad did not do is link white people to being Edomites. Elijah Muhammad didn't teach if the white man was Esau. But you see, Edward Bibbins and One West took the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and just slapped Esau's name on it like a bumper sticker. Elijah Muhammad didn't say nothing about Esau. And it's the same thing about the 13th tribe. All of the old scholars and ancient sources link the Khazars to being Japheth, heathen peoples of the north. None of them talk about them being Hebrew Edomites from Arabia and the Red Sea in Africa. Nobody talks about that. And here's a source about the Khazars that we're going to read. The Khazar clan, Joseph was king of the Khazars, traced the ancestry of his people to Japheth, one of the sons of Noah. Japheth to Gomer, and from Gomer to Togarmah. According to him, Togarmah had 10 sons, Khazar being the 7th, from which his people descend. They mixed with Magog, Scythians, and later occupied the ancient territory in the Caucasus. There is a legend concerning Alexander of Macedonia and what the Arabs call the Wall of Gog and Magog. He supposedly cut off these barbarian tribes from the civilized world by a gigantic barrier. This was called the Iron Gate. Here's another thing that One West twists. I heard the story in Arab legend about the barbarians of Japheth being trapped in the Caucasus Mountains. I've heard that story before. But you know what the One Westerners did? They completely ripped Japheth out of the story and slapped Esau on it like a bumper sticker again. The story was about barbarian Japhites being trapped in the Caucasus Mountains. Had nothing to do with Esau. Esau's not even in the picture. Esau was like 2,000 miles away. Nothing to do with it. And I literally just mentioned on a post on TikTok how Mount Seir is actually 1,000 miles away from the Caucasus Mountains. Nothing to do with them. It's talking about barbarian Japhites being there. But they slapped Esau on it just like they took Elijah Muhammad's doctrine about the whites in the Caucasus being barbarian and the savages, and they threw Esau on that, and then they throw Esau on this. But the actual sources say Japheth. Esau isn't mentioned. So, in history, the Khazars were never associated with being Edomites.